Welcome. We've talked about Protestant horror, surveying the works of Stephen King. We've talked about Catholic horror, focusing nearly exclusively on William Peter Blatty. Did I talk about Flannery O'Connor? I don't recall. We may have to do a totally separate stream on her. All right. So what I call old world horror would be the same as saying Orthodox horror. But for most of you, you're going to hear the word Orthodox and you're going to think right teaching, or any number of things that may carry a negative connotation. So I thought old world horror was a bit more specific and fit the context of what we're talking about, because in my explorations, I learned that what's going to differentiate this third and final subgenre is the fact that these writers believe in the supernatural things they're writing about. Now, you may say, well, so did William Peter Blatty, and that's true. William Peter Blatty did believe that. The difference is William Peter Blatty is writing to an audience that, on the outside at least, doesn't believe in ghosts and demons. Now, sure, there's going to be Catholics that read The Exorcist that already believed. There's going to be Protestants and spiritual people and neutral people, all kinds of people who are open to believing. But you're going to see the real difference is Protestant and Catholic horror over here in the West. Old war horror, I mean, we're in the East, baby. We are in Romania. We're in Bulgaria. We're in the old country. I mean, I'd love to think of Italy and these other Roman Catholic parts of Europe as old world, but I live in the United States, so the pop culture way that I receive images of, say, like what Roman Catholicism looks like, it's still very much like it's an immigration religion the same way that Orthodoxy is in America, but it's just still so Western. So I think that's why works like The Godfather and Sopranos were romanticizing Sicily and the old world, but the characters in those stories are still deeply disconnected from their past. Us in the West, I would say even more so, but that's probably why we relate to these stories. So for any writer listening now, it's the idea that something so specific as Michael Corleone going to Sicily to get to and learning about his family and where he came from, is a specific thing about a specific culture and a specific people, but it resonates to all of us. I mean, I'm sure Italian Americans love these stories, but man, so do a lot of us who are not Italian. Hello, I don't speak or read Russian, but hello, thank you for being here. So with that out of the way, I want to just dive right in. So there's a line in the 60s Soviet version, film version of the V, where one of the monastics says, "Every woman's a witch," and I love that because it gives us this taste of this very old world, a specific old world view. But this is just one guy. I'm not saying like the old world. Our ancestors in the East saw it this way, but yeah, every woman is a witch. And they are. Every woman is a witch. I mean, I don't mean that as a bad thing. Women have menstrual cycles, right? Women have life that is created inside of them and gestates, and then a new human being, a new soul comes out, and it's this new thing, immortal forever. I don't know if we existed before our parents copulated and conceived us. I don't know. Did our souls already exist? Were we already around before that happened? Or did we not exist at all? And then we come into the world, and now our souls are here forever. Our bodies may go back to the earth, but souls are here forever. It's amazing. But yes, every woman's a witch, and the best that a man can do is find some kind of rite of passage. But God gives women their own rites of passage. Women have like these biological rites of passage, and you can say, men do too, with puberty. But our puberty, we're not really getting anything that a woman's not getting. When a young boy starts growing pubic hair, armpit hair, all these things, and gets freaked out. If he's not properly prepared for it, how's that any different from a little girl experiencing that? It's not. But on top of it, the little girl is bleeding. So boys have to do things like go out in the woods, get initiated into hunting, or they do something like create Freemasonry, where there's a rite of passage in that way. Man has to create things. Man has to create substitutes, and Freemasonry is all about the substitute word. So yeah, men have to almost live like a substitute warlock life, and maybe that's why we kind of get jealous of women and call them witches. And I just think it's so timely today too, with women's rights and right to terminate pregnancies. Like, that's so rife with witch energy. So if there's any women listening right now that really would like to be a witch and is wondering, like, how could I be a witch? Well, if you've ever terminated a pregnancy, congratulations. You're already a witch. All right. Let's see here. So I prepared some notes so to help us stay on task, because there's just so much awesome stuff to talk about. I'm just gonna stay focused right here. It's just I'm gonna read real quick what I'm seeing in the chat. It's just my name in Orthodox Slavic. It comes out that I am right on time. Something like Nicholas. All these coincidences. Nice topic, by the way. Thank you so much. There's been a lot of synchronicity, and I'm glad that I did this right in time for you to jump on. Thanks for being here. So in surveying Stephen King, we explored what I call Protestant horror, a phenomenon of the 1970s and 80s that professes in a demon-haunted world, evil never dies. Prot horror blossomed out of the success of modern Catholic horror, or rather out of the success of trailblazer William Peter Blatty. Catholic horror is based around Blatty's idea that the oppression of demons paradoxically provides hope because it proves the immortality of the soul. Now, get ready for the third and most philosophically unique of our theologians of horror, Nikolai Gogol. Open your mind and stretch your imagination to understand the nearly forgotten and until now unnamed subgenre Old World Horror. We will delve into Old World Horror using the 19th century novella The V as our doorway into this genre that blurs fiction, belief, and the historical zeitgeist. I wasn't going to call it Orthodox horror because, unlike RCs and Prots, Orthodoxy has never sanctioned the work of a horror author. And I'll tell you, as an Orthodox Christian and artist and writer, it is really hard to be a creator, which is funny since God calls us to be little creators. And maybe some of that is the struggle for Westerners to adopt that Eastern mindset that that Orthodox teaches, the peasant mindset. So maybe it's mistranslation. I don't know, but when you read the Church Fathers, they're really anti-imagination. But I'm not a theologian. I'm not a seminarian. So my hope, and kind of what my gut is telling me right now, is it's not that Orthodoxy is anti-imagination. It's that Orthodoxy is anti-anxiety, anti-negative thinking. anti-delusions, and imagination can feed into all those things if you don't have a stable foundation. So for right now, in this work that we're doing, we're going to assume that orthodoxy is okay with creating beauty and creating art, and that it's the fault um, of just the misunderstandings of those priests and bishops and authorities in the West who would rather see Orthodox Christianity not have artists. And even in Protestantism, there's a book called something about the mediocrity of Christian art or whatever, and it's like what happened to Christian art anyway. Um, that's something that I would love to hear more about. If anyone has any ideas about why is it so why is it such a struggle to create art and be an Orthodox Christian? And I mean, maybe it's not for some folks, but at least with the stuff I want to talk about, like it's a real struggle. Like, how are you going to do this and be Orthodox? Jay Dyer's horror. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for understanding. There's got to be a way to reconcile that. And no, you're not the first one to think I look a little like Jay Dyer. And while I'm talking about Jay Dyer, I think it's funny. I knew of Jay Dyer for years back in the early 2010s when YouTube was just this beautiful place where you can find all kinds of deep dives into conspiratorial kind of topics. And I just, the algorithm suggested Jay Dyer to me, and I just assumed he was some guy who talked about pop culture stuff and interesting facts. And it was way later before I realized that he was on his way to converting to Orthodoxy. So yeah, I think that David Lynch is right about how we get ideas. And I think it's interesting that someone like Jay Dyer, who, even though I was aware of him, I didn't really know anything about his work. And he's from Tennessee. I'm from Mississippi. So it's just kind of interesting that, whatever's floating around, whatever spirits and demons and angels and messengers are whispering in his ear, we're kind of in the same neighborhood. So it's not unusual to find a lot of the same people thinking about the same things. But good golly, Miss Molly, I'm going to move on ahead because we got some more to talk about. So what I'm calling old world horror is a perspective, a belief system alive in the storyteller that exists east of E.T.A. Hoffman's Berlin, despite the age of enlightenment. V is arguably Gogol's novella. The V is arguably the singular work that exemplifies this genre. If you want to read anything similar, Gustav Meyrink's The Golem, which appears almost 100 years later, is the closest thing that I could think of that's similar to this work. And to go back to what I said earlier, yeah, William Peter Blatty believed in what he was writing in The Exorcist. He believed in demons, but the characters in his story do not. They're atheists. It's this whole idea of the skeptic seeing reality and having the world turned upside down. And Gogol, Coma the philosopher, the protagonist in the V, enters the haunted church. It's a haunted church in the film. I can't remember if in the novella he's in the church or he's in the churchyard. But anyway, when he comes in as a seminarian, he's also using folk magic along with exorcism prayers to protect himself. And this is something that my Eastern Orthodox friends who are actually ethnically and like from these Orthodox countries and they're cradle Orthodox, they don't see any issue with certain cultural customs in their religious practices. Whereas I know people right here in Mississippi who are like, say, Roman Catholics who converted to Orthodoxy, and they are essentially racist towards, African Orthodox Christians Bulgarian Orthodox Christians, because they see, these folk customs. They would say they see it as satanic and demonic. And unfortunately, when you live in the southern United States, we're around different cultures all the time. So even though we look like flaming racist to the rest of the country, it's more than just the fact that we're flaming racist. It's the fact that you've got all these different versions of Christianity around you. So, and there's only one Christianity, right? So when you see an African person with their own culture to this white guy at my church, it looks like Satan, right? And he just, when it comes down to it, dude's just a racist. But the same goes for Romani people or anything else that looks like magic. Folks are just going to freak out. But what they don't realize, because they're zealous converts, is one of the most beautiful things about Orthodoxy is when the apostles spread Orthodoxy throughout the world, Orthodoxy assimilated the customs of the culture into the church. So you have variation, whether you're in Ethiopia or Bulgaria. And I just think that that's beautiful. And I think that's why it's not the same ethically, morally questionable type of conversion. Like with the Roman Catholics, Spanish religious forces just annihilated the cultures and just destroyed them, just like our friends here in America would likely do. You see anything that looks like it came from Africa, they're gonna be like, look, it's a demon, and they're gonna destroy it, right? It's just so sad. But I think Orthodoxy is beautiful because our ancestors before Christ came could look at the world and see, just by looking at the moon and stars, a lot of theology is already readily available by looking at the natural world. So when Christ came and the apostles brought the gospel to these other cultures, whether it was Africa or wherever, these people were like, yeah, we've already got a cross. Like in Voodoo, it's like, this is one of our primary symbols. So when these Catholic missionaries are coming up to us destroying our ancestral altars and putting up Catholic saints, it's a little traumatic, but at the same time, it's like they could see it. Despite all the persecution, they could see that Christ was truth. And unfortunately, some of the racist zealots that I worship with, they haven't gotten that yet. So I just think it's beautiful, though. I just think it's absolutely beautiful. So to go back to what I was saying, Coma, the philosopher, the main character in the V, he's a seminarian, but like all the seminarians in the short story, he's a drunk and a party boy. So when the goings get tough, he's like, not only am I praying to God, but I'm also gonna, pull out my evil eye and all my other stuff to face evil. And I really relate to that. I think that's what makes it funny, makes it really funny. But it also just makes it deep and rich. So well before he struck down in terror at the sight of the V, Coma is a believer in a world of believers. He expects to participate in the supernatural. So that's what's different about this kind of story. Our main character goes in, even though he's kind of what you might say confused, because he's using a little folk magic. He's using the liturgy of the church. He's reading Psalms, even though he's mixing and matching, as the Roman Protestants would say. He's a believer, unlike Chris McNeil and The Exorcist, who is just kind of like, her world is disrupted and she's like, what's going on? I can't fathom what's happening. I'm trying to accept that maybe my daughter's possessed. Coma is just like, yeah, this is not going to be a good night. I'm really not happy about having to do this. Like the characters in modern fantasy fiction, the lore is based on the real beliefs of historical people. So this isn't some Tolkien stuff where, hey, I'm going to like world build. This is like, we're reading literature, but also learning about the history and the culture of people. So it's an anthropological adventure. In this case, Slavic peoples possessing what we would call rich pagan traditions, who are simultaneously devout Christians living in an Eastern Orthodox country. It just kind of goes back to what I was saying. To us, it might look like the same kind of mix matching that you're seeing in Protestantism, but the difference is in America, we can be like, well, I like this about Wicca, so I'm going to do this. I like this about this, so I'm going to do this. But the difference with what we're talking about is it's like, no, like you were born into this. In this world, unfortunately, I don't really know any like romantic customs to give you an example, but well, like the fire dances in Bulgaria, that would be one. Like that's not anything that an Orthodox Christian in any other country would know about unless you've been to Bulgaria. But I think what is it, once a year, Bulgarians walk over hot coals for healing. Let's move on. I gotta stay focused here, y'all. In contemporary Western culture, the Brothers Grimm are kind of the closest thing that we have to that, but all those rich fairy tales and the stories of our ancestors have been replaced by, essentially the Chronicles of Narnia and the Lord of the Rings stuff. And now we have decades of literature inspired by those two men, and it's kind of, we just got to get back, y'all. We got to get back. Because I don't think there's anything wrong with that type of literature, but essentially now, if you want to write a book and get published, you're not writing the only way there is to write. The novel is just something that was invented in the Victorian times. So essentially, even if you're writing meta literature about some non-binary homosexuals walking through the park and deciding whether or not they're going to break up, you're just imitating Victorian writing, which is essentially kind of a new phenomenon, so I think for us writers, we think that's like the only way to write. You just write like chapter 1, here's my novel, but we're just imitating what Goethe was doing. Just like before him, Dante was imitating what Homer was doing. So now, most folks, and y'all can tell me if I'm wrong in the chat, if you're writing fantasy literature, you're imitating Tolkien. And what I would like to see is not people necessarily like creating their own fairy tales or writing a new version of fairy tale, although that's dope, but just reacquainting yourself, or for the first time, read the actual stories of your ancestors. But who knows? You may find that that's even more difficult than just reading the Bible. Just as William Peter Blight's The Exorcist is synonymous with Catholic horror, and the Catholic horror novel, Gogol's The V is the quintessential old world story. So let's talk about the worldview. So in old world horror, the stories are deeply rooted in the folklore, the traditions, and the religious beliefs of Eastern Europe. They're fatalistic morality tales filled with superstition, which distinguish them from the more modern rationalistic approaches to horror. All right, in the chat, I can relate to this as a Polish Slavic person. Orthodoxy kind of changes lens on spiritual phenomena and transcendent layer, and as a transcendent layer to folklore and demonology. I try to fuse known tales with new. This is really cool. I want to know more about what you're writing. So if you want to share anything with us, if you have any links, Nicola, then feel free to share. This is a space for you to connect with the rest of this community. So Nicola, feel free to use this chat to give us a glimpse or an opportunity to see your work, because it sounds really fascinating. So we've covered the worldview mindset of this kind of work. Let's talk about the author of the V, Nikolai Gogol, who is pretty much the reason we're here. So he was a Ukrainian-born writer who lived in the early 19th century. He traveled through the Slavic countries, lived in Russia. In his lifetime, the critics started referring to him as a Russian author and not as a Ukrainian author anymore. And his tales in his lifetime are really seen as a way for these people in Russia to kind of get a glimpse into Slavic folklore, and they loved it. I mean, who isn't a Slavophile? Who isn't? I know I am. So Gogol's works are steeped in the cultural and religious traditions of his homeland, providing us with a unique glimpse into the pathways and wishing wells of old world horror. Old world horror. I always want to say old war. Old world horror. Okay, so it's a masterpiece. The V is a masterpiece of old world horror. The Ukrainian Gogol, like an anthropologist traveling these Slavic countries on his way to becoming the great Russian storyteller, he was a believer, not a reporter, right? So it's not like he's just going off and like doing the Brothers Grimm thing and like reporting, like collecting, like this Alan Lomax thing of like just collecting the tales. In my understanding, like he believed what he was writing. So sorcery, restless spirits, the clash between the sacred and the profane. All right. So the V itself, the novella comes out in 1835. It revolves around a young seminary student named Coma Brutus, or Tomas, as we would say in English. So if you do end up reading the story and his name isn't Coma in the translation, they translate as Thomas, same name, just different spelling. And real quick, while I'm talking to you, you'll hear a criticism, and you're only going to hear this from Protestants. Why are there white man names in the Bible? Why are these saints named after white people? Well, it's because they're translations and the names are anglicized. So, yeah, or at least some of them are. I guess. All right, so the V revolves around a young seminary student named Coma Brutus, who is forced by a wicked old woman to stay overnight in a haunted churchyard. Coma's encounter with a demonic force known as the V leads to a harrowing ordeal that tests his faith and sanity. So let's talk about believers, old world beliefs and superstitions. What sets the V apart is its deep connection to the old world beliefs and superstitions prevalent in Eastern Europe at the time. Gogol skillfully weaves elements of Slavic folklore, Orthodox Christianity, and the fear of the supernatural into the narrative. All right, so the V itself. So just like in the thumbnail I'm using from the Soviet version of the V, or just V, the V is not the witch. Before I saw the flick, I just saw the beautiful images from it. I thought, V is this beautiful woman from the movie. The V doesn't show up till the end. It's just like Bride of Frankenstein. And, the fact that you don't see the Bride of Frankenstein till the last 3 minutes, but that's not to the detriment of the film at all. You don't see the exorcism doesn't happen till the end of The Exorcist, which again, not to the detriment of the film. These are what I call like event movies, event stories, where like the entire story of the film is leading up to that like final scene. And then you have your epilogue. So for those of you that saw the thumbnail, that's the beautiful maiden / old crone that gets our protagonist into trouble. The V itself is truly an iconic monster embodying the fears of the old world. It's a grotesque, malevolent being with a single giant eye, and it's said to be the embodiment of pure evil. Its appearance and behavior draw from the nightmares of generations. Binding imprints. That imprint runs deep, y'all. There is no thing under the sun. King Solomon. Like all stories, a character leaves one place and enters another, where it be a new town or a new mental space. And like many old world stories, the V grapples with the tension between faith and superstition. Coma's struggle to reconcile his religious beliefs with the terrifying events he witnesses is at the core of the novella. All right. Let's just talk about religion as atheists. So if we were atheists and not believers, but we wanted to talk about these things, we could conclude that there's only two gods, Eros and Thanatos. And this kind of goes back to my struggle with being an artist, a writer, and a practicing Orthodox Christian. The erotic and death. Orthodox people don't have such a problem with death. We don't. We definitely don't have a problem with that. We do have a problem with the sensual. It seems to me, but granted, I live in the United States where even our priests are converts most of the time. And if you ever heard a priest talk about marriage, you would get the impression that despite the fact that we in America don't encourage our wives to cover our hair, you would get the impression that married couples in the Orthodox Church in America don't have healthy sex lives. So, but maybe that's not so much an Orthodox convert thing; it's more of an American thing. I don't know. But let's talk about the sacred and the profane. Throughout the V, we see a constant battle between the sacred and the profane. The temple, a place of divine worship, becomes a battleground for supernatural forces, highlighting the vulnerability of human faith in the face of ancient, malevolent entities. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about skeptics facing supernatural things. An atheist in the woods. Yeah, or like I like to say, there's no such thing as an atheist in the woods. Essential old world horror elements. The V encapsulates essential elements of old world horror. A rural, isolated setting, a morally ambiguous protagonist, and the pervasive influence of folklore and religion. It's a story that delves into the darkest corners of the human psyche, where the line between reality and the supernatural blurs. That's why Flannery O'Connor is such a great Catholic writer. And I wait for the day that the Orthodox Church can see such right. I know we have Dostoevsky. I get it. But really, like, I'm talking about people in the West. I want to see like Western artists who are able to tell real stories with. It's really weird. It's like, what's the difference between an Orthodox person being like, you can't enjoy sex. Sex is just for making babies. What's the difference between that and someone saying, your fiction has to be New Yorker safe, and it's got to have trans characters, and it's got to have all this, and it's got to look a certain way. You can't tell a story that way. That's like trying to stories about conflict. So how can you have a story about the sacred without having the profane in there? I don't know. It's disappointing, but that's why we're here. That's part of the work that we're doing, is so we can fix this problem of Orthodox folks not being able to be creative, not being able to love. I will say, while I'm being so critical, if you're so empty and lacking in any kind of creativity or creative regenerative forces, when you go up to the chalice, when you go up to that cup and you partake of the Eucharist and the blood of Christ and his body go into you, and then a little bit of you goes back into that communal cup, and a little bit of me and a little bit of all of us are mixed in the cup, and the cup is in us. When you're that empty, I can see how that's a good way to approach the cup. I mean, it's the exact same thing as if you were going to take LSD or eat mushrooms. You don't want to eat beforehand because you want to receive it with an empty stomach. You want to go into it with longing, with nothing else in the way. Um, and if that sounds sacrilegious to you, that makes sense because everything in this fallen world is a reflection of Christ. That's why all you have to do is open your eye and see that Christ is true, because everything else in the world is an inverted Christ. So please don't think I'm being disrespectful by comparing taking psychedelics to taking the Eucharist, because why wouldn't they be so similar? Why wouldn't they be? Of course they are. So in closing, while The Exorcist may be the definitive Catholic horror, Gogol's the V deserves recognition as the essential old world horror story. It's a testament to the power of regional folklore and religious beliefs in shaping the horror genre. So if you want to delve deep into the heart of European or Eastern European darkness, the V is essential. I've said a whole lot. I said a lot more on this topic than I thought I would. We touched on different things. We went there. We went crazy. But this is just the start of talking about the V to learn how to write. So we can be little creators, creating under God, bringing beauty into the world. And I love it too, because we have an Orthodox writer in the chat with us right now. And for right now, he's only written in Polish, and he will complete his first novel this year. It's a fusion of folklore and conspiracy theories, modern times YA. That's awesome. We need more YA writers. And just because something's YA doesn't mean it can't be fulfilling and satisfying and helpful to an adult. I think as a child, I read certain YA novels as an escape. And as an adult, I reread some of those novels and was educated. Really learned a lot about myself. And I really encourage anyone, go back and read. Just think of a book that you remember really liking. And you may just remember the cover and the feeling you had. Go back and read that book. You may find words in that book or situations that you had forgotten about, and then realize that very well may be why I went off in that direction. It was this book. I had no idea, but this is when I recognized that word and decided in my mind that's an important word. And then when I found it other places, I followed it. Nicholas says the dichotomy of a person's own belief in the spiritual and not. How do you spell this author's name? Because you made me curious. Okay, Nikolai Gogol. Nikolai Gogol. I'm sure you can find it for free to read on the internet. If you have a Kindle or tablet, I'm sure it's for free to download onto that reading device, because, I mean, this is public domain stuff. Go onto YouTube. Go onto YouTube, because it will also help this channel if you don't leave YouTube after watching this video. If you want to help this channel, why don't you look up B and oh my gosh, what's the name of the Soviet movie making studio, which Mosul Film? I think it's Mosul Film. They have a YouTube channel where like all their films are available to watch for free. So if you want to help the channel, you can look up V on YouTube and watch the whole movie. And it's only a little over an hour long. Or you don't have to watch it. You could just leave it playing in the background, and YouTube will say like, wow, this guy watched Alec Hawkins' live stream and then stayed on YouTube for another hour. And I can't remember why I was specifically wanting you to watch the movie right now, other than like, oh, I guess it's just because I was telling you that the novella is available for free because it's public domain. But you can also watch the movie for free. And as far as I know, it's not only the first Soviet horror film, it may be the only Soviet horror film. And you wonder how like a religious horror film got made under the Soviet Union. maybe because they saw it as kind of poking fun at the church, since all the like religious authority are like really mean people, and then all the seminarians are drunken. But this is the thing, especially for those of you who are interested in converting to Orthodoxy, every priest you meet is a human, every bishop you meet is a human, and these are their jobs. So it's no different than going to the bank and like having to pay fees and for things that you don't want, and the bank's just ripping you off, or your local light and water department is ripping you off. Like, you got to remember, the clerics in the church are human beings, and it's a job. So don't have any delusion about converting to Orthodoxy and having a good time. You're going to meet shit people, especially if they wear black, especially. And I'm just letting you know. So I think that the Soviet Union produced V because they were like, yeah, this is great. Let's make fun of religion. I don't think the movie makes fun of religion at all. I think it just accurately depicts what most monasteries probably look like. It's people. Anyway. I'm going to continue to be critical of Orthodox clerics on this channel because, number one, anyone who sets out to become a priest is probably a sociopath. And, ideally, someone's just a faithful Christian, and then the authorities around him say, like, this guy would make a good priest. But anyone who's just like, I'm going to be a priest, stay far away from those dudes. And don't get me wrong, I know some really incredible men and their wives who, and I don't know how they do it. So there's good people in the church, but oh my God, there's predators everywhere, man. So I just want to say, for those of you all who see the beauty in Orthodoxy, or maybe those of you who are already in the church and struggling, like, yes, they're people. They're people. They're people. So just be careful, because a lot of psychological damage can be done. So, I'll just leave you with a story real quick. The guy that used to serve our parish, every time I'd kiss his hand, because, he's you kiss the priest's hand for a blessing. This is me kissing my priest's hand. He would do that every time into my face every time. Really, really cool. Really cool, but this is what happens. This is what happens. I'm sure Jay Dyer will tell you all about it. If you are excited about Orthodoxy and you want to write and talk about it, you better believe any man that wears a cassock and has that silver cross around his neck will be like, who is this mofo who thinks he can talk about this subject? So, yeah. Sometimes I feel like I'm reading in the V. I'm living in the V, not just reading it. Thank y'all for supporting the channel. Thank you for being here. And you have everything you need to get started. So go do the work.